Is Humza Yousaf Scottish? Is Humza Yousaf Scottish? That could be quite a dangerous question to try to answer in Scotland, because Humza Yousaf's got one person convicted. They got fined for basically saying they didn't think Humza Yousaf was Scottish. But anyway, let's carry on regardless, shall we? The reason I'm making this video is I've seen quite a few people commenting online that they don't think Humza Yousaf is Scottish, therefore he shouldn't be the First Minister or whatever, this sort of line. Now, in making this video, is Humza Yousaf Scottish? I'd imagine some people will be quite angry. They'll say, you should never have made that video. You should never ask that question. How dare you? Other people might be quite angry because they're saying, well, of course he isn't. What a stupid question to ask. Everyone knows Humza Yousaf is not Scottish. So let's just cool down a little bit and take a step back. And I'm going to look at 7 areas to assess Humza Yousaf's Scottishness. Off we go. Number 1, citizenship. Well, Humza Yousaf's a UK citizen. He's lived in Scotland his whole life. So in terms of like officialdom, is Humza Yousaf Scottish? Well, yes. Now, number 2, ancestry. Humza Yousaf's parents were born in other countries, so he's a second generation immigrant, if you like. But the way nation states work is they admit people, grant citizenship, and once citizenship is granted, then the people are treated as equal members of the society, and I believe that's what should happen in the case of Humza Yousaf, obviously. Now, someone's ancestry might have other influences on them, but we'll talk about that in some areas later on. So Humza Yousaf's ancestry, is that relevant to any claim of Scottishness? Well, I would say not. Number 3, race. Now, if Humza Yousaf were to do one of these DNA tests where you take a hair, send it away in an envelope, then get some readout a little while later saying where your ancestors hailed from around the world, it wouldn't come back saying Scottish. But I think that is actually irrelevant, because I'm sure, as I do, you'll know people in Scotland of different races, and in many cases their race is just entirely irrelevant. It's not an indicator of any sort of difference whatsoever, apart from, skin colour. Now, sometimes race might be an indicator that someone's more likely to have other sort of differences in terms of values or culture. Okay, that's a reasonable thing to discuss. But being logical, we don't want to be prejudiced. We want to deal with the individual. And so even if in general people of a certain race might have certain values or there might be certain differences, then if we're going to be logical, if we're going to avoid prejudice, we deal with individuals rather than groups. Now, for some people, of course, they take race as an excuse for like tribal hostility. There's just a part of human nature that sometimes people are tempted to just fall into hostility towards another group for no reason at all. I mean, the classic example is football fans. Many parts of the world, rival football fans absolutely hate each other to the point of murderous violence in many cases. And that just illustrates to me that people will turn on each other in group conflict for basically no reason at all. But sometimes race is the purported reason for that. So actually race is irrelevant. But my one problem here with Humza Yousaf is that I say race is irrelevant to whether he's Scottish or not, but Humza Yousaf wants to say race is a very, very, very important issue. So Humza Yousaf says, race is part of the reason he should be First Minister rather than a white person, because that's a good thing to have a brown First Minister rather than another white First Minister. So despite Humza Yousaf's attempt to make race a really fundamental part of political identity, if you like, and then I say no, I say race is irrelevant, so to whether or not Humza Yousaf is Scottish. Right, number 4, identity. Now, we've seen a couple of times Humza Yousaf wears a sort of semi-Pakistani outfit when he was sworn as an MSP and as the First Minister. So if we're looking at the question, is he Scottish? Well, it's as though he's trying to answer that question by saying not entirely. I'm a bit mixed, actually. I'm Pakistani Scottish. Now, I've got a bit of a problem for that with someone putting forward themselves to be First Minister of Scotland. Now, if Humza Yousaf wants to wear his ethnic outfit at the SNP ball or to get married in or whatever, then absolutely fine. But when you've been sworn in as the First Minister of the nation of Scotland, I'm not so sure. So in terms of identity, is Humza Yousaf Scottish? I would say yes, but he deliberately blurs the picture. Number 5, culture. Now, Humza Yousaf obviously comes from a mixed cultural background, the Pakistani influence with his family, and then been brought up in Scotland. Now, Humza Yousaf expresses a lot of features of Scottish culture, and I don't think that's an act. I think he was brought up in Glasgow. I think that's absolutely genuine. But I also think he makes a deliberate choice to maintain aspects of Pakistani culture within himself as well. Now, as far as I'm concerned, for Humza Yousaf, I've got no problem with that at all. I think in many ways you can make a case that Humza Yousaf is more Scottish than me. So is Humza Yousaf Scottish in the cultural sense? Well, I'd say yes. Right, number 6, religion. Now, in many nations around the world, there's a religious nationalism, which I think is very, very unhealthy. There'll be some people in India who will say, if you're not Hindu, you're not a proper Indian. There'll be people in many, many Muslim majority countries who say, if you're not Muslim, you're not really a proper citizen of this country. There's some people who would say in Western countries, if you're not Christian, you're not really a proper European or whatever. You're not really part of this nation. I disagree with that philosophy entirely, because it's the recipe for a fractured society. So looking at Humza Yousaf's Muslim faith, right, am I concerned about his beliefs? Some Muslims hold beliefs that I would say are anti-democratic, extreme, intolerant. Does Humza Yousaf hold those views? Well, as far as I can tell, he doesn't. In terms of his religious practice, he seems quite keen on marking Ramadan, etc., etc. Is that a problem? Does that make him un-Scottish? I would say no. Now, Islam for many people has got quite a strong cultural aspect as well. Arabic culture is quite intertwined with Islam. I don't see any evidence really of Humza Yousaf trying to take on that culture. So in terms of his Islamic faith, does that undermine his identification or his identity as being Scottish? I would say no, it doesn't. But another aspect maybe related to that is like loyalty and solidarity. And I've saved that one till last. So on we go to number 7, loyalty. Now, in nations where you've got an immigrant community or a minority community, quite often the accusation's made that they're not really loyal to the nation that they're living in. Like in the 1930s in Germany, people would say the Jews, they're not real Germans. They don't really care about Germany. And it's the same with minority groups around the world, many, many nations. This is the accusation made against them by the native population, if you like. So let's look at this question. They're not really loyal to our nation. Now, you can ask 2 questions about that. First one, is it true? Or to what extent is it true? And the second question is, does it matter? Or to what extent does it matter? Now, I've met immigrants in Scotland whose attitude to Scotland is, okay, I've come to live here for the time being because it suits. You get free education, free healthcare. I've got a good job at the moment, but I'd actually like to move to somewhere sunny. So when I get the chance, if the better job comes up somewhere else, I'll go and live there instead because I'll get better weather and that'll be great. Now, people like that, they're not really committed to the welfare of the nation in the longer term. They don't really have an investment in the long-term future of the nation. How are things going to work out for future generations? Well, they're maybe not so bothered about that. And I think it's likely that people of that mindset might be more selfish in their attitude towards the state where they reside. Because the state's like a giant mutual support society. And if people just see themselves as here for the very short term, they're not invested in the future of that system. Similarly, if times of hardship come, real crisis in a nation, such people are more likely to say, all right, things are getting a bit tough here. I'll go and live somewhere else. Or let's say worst case scenario, war is looming. These people are less likely to say, okay, I'm willing to fight. We need to defend our nation here. They're more likely to say, all right, it's time to go. This has nothing to do with me. I'm going to leave them to it. Now, I think if too large a proportion of the population has that type of attitude, then that is a problem. And another way this comes out with immigrant communities sometimes is with regard to foreign affairs, where it becomes apparent that their loyalty or their priorities are elsewhere than the national interest of the nation where they live, or objective moral values as well in some cases. Because ideally, when it comes to foreign policy, decisions should be made by the national interest and what's right. And you try and operate on those principles. Whereas sometimes with immigrant communities, the national interest bit isn't actually there. So to what extent is it true that immigrants have these issues? Well, to a significant degree. There's quite a spectrum of that. Now, and if I moved to another country, I mean, the same issues would apply to me. So I think, therefore, the SNP's trends towards letting people vote, if they're here on holiday, just anyone can have a vote. It doesn't matter on what basis you're here or for how long. I think that is unwise. Let's put it that way. I would add at this point as well, there are some natives in countries as well who have a very short-term and maybe selfish attitude to the nation where they live. So does it matter? I've as explained, in some ways it does. But at the extreme, these problems manifest in civil wars when you've got different identities, different allegiances within the same state. That's why you need to moderate immigration in order to ensure we have a united society committed to building a better future together. Right. How about Humza Yousaf then? Where is his loyalty? Well, I think he is loyal to Scotland in the long term. I don't see him deciding to leave Scotland and go and live somewhere else because things have got a bit tough here. But I don't think I see that happening. Wouldn't rule it out completely, but I don't envisage that. Certainly within the United Kingdom, his allegiance is to Scotland rather than the United Kingdom as a whole. But what about foreign affairs? What happens then? I think it's quite apparent with Humza Yousaf that his loyalty, he has a very strong loyalty to the Ummah, the worldwide Muslim community. When he meets international leaders, it's often from Muslim majority countries. Which issues animate him the most? It's ones that include Muslim majority countries. Look at the Israel-Gaza conflict. I've never seen such passion from Humza Yousaf over any other issue, any domestic issue. This is the one issue where he really seems to mean what he says. Every other issue, people have said, what does Humza Yousaf really believe? And I'd say, I don't know. I'm not sure he really believes anything. I think he just goes with what his advisors tell him, whatever he thinks is going to work out best. When it comes to Israel and Gaza, it's a different matter. He really, genuinely, passionately cares about that issue. When Humza Yousaf talks about his political journey, how did he end up as a Scottish nationalist? Well, it says he became a Scottish nationalist as a way of avoiding going to, like the war in Iraq. In other words, going to war against a Muslim majority country. So it seems to me that Humza Yousaf has got a very strong tendency in foreign affairs to take the side of the Muslims, the Muslim majority countries. So I think his loyalty is in question. Now, I'll talk about this a bit more in my lecture, Humza Yousaf, Man, Myth and Muslim, which is going around Scotland before too long. Keep your eye open for that. So is that a problem? That is a problem for someone who's the First Minister of Scotland. Now, Scotland's got no foreign policy power, thank goodness. But I find it a little bit of a concern domestically as well. How does this allegiance to fellow Muslims play out in domestic affairs as well? I've spoken over the years about the way Islamic organisations tend to get substantial grants from the Scottish government. Well, maybe this ties in as well. Now, Humza Yousaf makes much of praying as a Muslim. Okay, fair enough. But when it comes to traditional Muslim values in terms of social, moral values, they're nowhere to be seen. So he wants to be seen as a Muslim, but he doesn't bring in Muslim ideas into politics particularly. You don't hear him saying, I'm a Muslim, so I think we should have this policy. This is the way to create a good society. Which I'd be actually quite open to hearing that, bring forward your case. Let's hear it. What we hear from Humza, well, what seems to be the case more with Humza Yousaf is, I'm a Muslim, so I'm on the side of the Muslims. And that's not fine. That's a competing loyalty. So to answer my own question, is Humza Yousaf Scottish? Well, yes, but he seems to have a dangerously divided loyalty. If Humza Yousaf heard me saying that, no doubt he would immediately say that's Islamophobic or racist, which is obviously complete nonsense. Now, I think Muslims, as with all groups, there'd be a spectrum of opinion. Some Muslims wouldn't particularly have this loyalty assumption that the Muslims are on the right side of every conflict around the world. You might find some Muslims do tend to look at things through that sort of lens. But for a lot of Muslims, it doesn't really matter. But when you're the First Minister, it really, really does. And it's a problem when a nation's led by a man whose deepest loyalties sometimes seem to lie elsewhere. Right, thanks for watching. Do have a look at the description of this video. There's all sorts of things you can find there, ways you can interact with the Scottish Family Party. Thanks again for watching.